Welcome in, everybody. Welcome back. Today, in this video, it's Sunday night. I'm recording this. We're going to talk about the Great Reset. Now, I'm recording it Sunday night. I'm going to release this video, so you'll be seeing it. Should be Monday, about between 5 and 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So this is the book that I'm going to refer to, and we're going to talk about it briefly. We're going to talk about some of the key aspects of the book, some of the criticisms. I have a little presentation that we can go through, and I'll give you sort of my overarching view of what the Great Reset really is and what I think about it in today's world. So this was presented as a response to COVID and the global implications that COVID had on both social issues and economic issues, geopolitical issues, and so on. So we'll get into it. So this is basically the book. It's written by Klaus Schwab, who's the chairman of the World Economic Forum, and Thierry Malloret, who is an economist. And I guess he was like the editor of the Monthly Barometer, which is sort of a subscription-based economy type of predictive newsletter type of thing, but it's got its criticisms as well. One of them being that it's a sort of elitist publication, and it's subscription based only, and it's not widespread. And so we'll touch on that as well. So let's get into it. Let's talk about the Great Reset. The idea of I'll give you the synopsis as to how I have known about it and what I know about it. So essentially, the Great Reset is this globalist sort of agenda that the official narrative, it's designed in more flowery language to basically create a more equitable and environmentally friendly and socioeconomically sort of fair world. I mean, that's the essence of it. It's supposed to create a more equitable world. But if you look at the people involved in the World Economic Forum, which is like essentially an elite globalist consensus building forum, they meet in Davos, Switzerland every year, and a lot of different elites from politics, from the corporate world, from the banking world, from powerful tiers of society from all over the world meet, and they have their more public conference, but there's also a lot of sort of closed backdoor meetings and what have you, backroom meetings, however you want to describe it. I'm sure most of you have heard of the World Economic Forum. So a couple of the key points and key takeaways that they present. One is stakeholder capitalism. Now, in the book and in any discussions you may have heard about the Great Reset, they talk about it in a sort of, I think, like a euphemized way, like, oh, it's really to create a more fair and equitable world and more socially, like, for example, ESG, environmental and social governance, is something that kind of comes from a globalist agenda. And you have organizations like BlackRock, and you have people like Bill Gates, and people who are all in on the whole globalism model that are part of the World Economic Forum, including, powerful people from all over the world in business and in politics, and it's kind of along the lines of like the Bilderberg group, and a lot has been said about it over the years, that while they paint themselves to be this beneficent organization that cares about the world and about humanity and so on and so forth, and fairness and equity, some of the criticisms are that it's an elitist organization that basically wants to push a totalitarian world government onto everyone, basically the whole world. Now, one of the things I've discussed recently is that I believe if you look at the agenda, and I would recommend everybody do their own research on it, because I'm going to give you my overall takeaways. But I believe that everything we've been seeing for the last 6 years is directly in line with the stated goals of the Great Reset, which is more totalitarian policies that are based on stakeholder capitalism, which is essentially a small group of very rich and powerful entities. Let's just say banking, investment banks, global elites like billionaires want to own everything. So they're going to be the beneficent masters that will own everything. And as the famous paraphrase quote, you will own nothing and be happy, right? So their idea of fixing the world is they meaning the elites, the global elites, they'll own everything. They'll own all the world's resources. They'll have control over governments. They'll have control over land. They'll have control over property, private property, and that citizens will be just thankful to lease everything from them, even appliances. I mean, it goes that far. They also paint this picture of a global surveillance state. Does that sound familiar? Where everything you do online and in real life is monitored. Think about Palantir. Think about the Flock camera systems. Think about all the data harvesting and the basically metadata that's scooped up, and how basically, biometrics, everything we do, we're tracked. So this is one part of the Great Reset. And you've probably heard about smart cities, or quote unquote 15-minute cities, which they will have this technocratic state where everything is surveilled, where you're basically, they have climate lockdown, so to speak, where you can't travel more than X amount per month, or you can't use more than X amount of fuel, or you can't, they're going to dictate essentially everything that people do under the guise of ESG, environmental, social governance, right? They talk a lot about social things. So having this sort of overarching, in other words, like thought police. So they want to, we already see it, right? In these censorship agendas, like you can't say certain things because it can be deemed as hate speech, or you could be labeled a domestic terrorist, or if you criticize certain groups or certain this or certain that. So this all, if you play it out, if you look at the big picture, all of these things are tied to a lot of the pretty much openly stated goals of the globalists, which is what the World Economic Forum is. It's basically a globalist forum. Now, one of the other things that the globalists and people like Bill Gates and these types have spoken about for years is reducing the world's population. Now, that has been a long standing goal of globalism, to reduce the world's population. Now, is it kind of coincidental that all these big tech people are pushing robotics, AI, they're pushing a surveillance state, and now these same organizations and these big companies are partnering with governments now. And so my thought is, and I'd like to get people's feedback on this, I believe we are in the late stages of them implementing the Great Reset. Now, they say in the book, COVID-19, the Great Reset, that they're doing this in response to these events like COVID-19. Yet, all of their policies that they have spoken about for many years are what they're proposing as a remedy for the problems that came from COVID-19. So they talk about supply chain issues. So they basically want governments and big business elites to have a global control mechanism. And what they do is they use in this particular case, COVID-19 as the basis, as the pretext to implement these policies. Now, if you pay attention and you look at big corporations and employers of all different levels, really, like municipalities, state governments, the federal government, they are partnering with these organizations. Now, BlackRock, it's the largest investment bank in the world. They have like $10 trillion in assets on their books. They are also tied in with people's retirement accounts. Many organizations have investment accounts or portfolios with BlackRock. So I talked about this in my last video. How are these organizations allowed to have so much widespread control? Now, if you're like me, you think that this has been an ongoing agenda and that these major world events have been the pretext that they've used to forward these agendas. Like 9/11, we saw the Patriot Act, which enabled a lot of domestic surveillance and unchecked power by certain agencies, namely Department of Homeland Security. Now, if you fast forward to spring of 2020, we saw how many people went along with giving up civil liberties and essentially agreeing to being tracked, contact tracing. They always do this. They I believe they create crises personally. So I don't believe it's problem, reaction, solution where they're just responding to a crisis. I believe oftentimes crises are created. I just don't buy that giant corporations and global elites wait for an opportunity because historically they've always been in power. So I believe that they want more power, so they create crises. Now, for regular people, many regular people will think that's crazy. They would never do that kind of thing. But the reality is there are sociopaths and psychopaths in the world, and it's a higher percentage than most people would realize if you never looked into it. And so you think about, here's this book, The Great Reset, and they're pitching it as a response to COVID-19. Yet these agendas have been in play with the globalists for a long time. So let's do this. I'm gonna throw up this right here. And we're just going to talk about it. The Great Reset. This is just my take on it. It's not that comprehensive of an analysis because that would take far too much time. All right. So let's get into it. Published in July 2020, at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, The Great Reset emerged as one of the most discussed and controversial books of the decade. Its timing was deliberate. The authors framed the pandemic not merely as a health crisis, but as a historic inflection point, exposing deep systemic weaknesses in global society. Klaus Schwab, founder and executive chairman of the World Economic Forum, brings decades of influence over global economic policy. Co-author Thierry Malloret is an economist and risk analyst with expertise in scenario planning and global risk assessment. Together, they argue that the pandemic laid bare the fragility of existing structures, economic inequality, environmental vulnerability, geopolitical instability, and that the world now faces a stark choice: rebuild smarter or return to a more broken status quo. Let me just throw this up full screen real quick. Okay. All right. So the book itself is broken down into three major sections: the macro reset, the micro reset, and the individual reset. So let's check this out and see what we got here. Well, let me do this one. This is better. All right. So the macro reset: economy, society, geopolitics, environment, and technology. The micro reset: industries, businesses, and companies. And the individual reset: personal behavior, priorities, and values. Three interconnected levels of transformation: global, institutional, and personal. All right. So the macro reset: deep disruption, right? This is based on crises, would cause mass unemployment, uncertainty, and stalled growth. And it rejects sacrificing human lives for GDP growth, calls for bold fiscal and monetary interventions, questions GDP as primary metric, emphasis on stakeholder capitalism and ESG metrics over shareholder primacy. We'll talk about that a little more. Possible degrowth or quality growth as alternative economic framework. Now, what do you think is more likely? Do you think that they really care about the betterment and the good of humanity? Or is it more likely that a bunch of billionaires and global elites want to continue to have more power and consolidation of wealth? I think the latter is the more likely scenario, and I think most people would agree. Now, in the title of this stream, I said The Great Reset: Unintentional Comedy or Elitist Delusion. Now, I think this book, if you really just understand these people, is comedic. They think that everybody's dumb and that they can just tell people, oh, we really care. That's why we want to do this. It has nothing to do with our investments. It has nothing to do for our unquenchable thirst for power and control. Right? That's the comedic part of it. But again, I recommend people look at the book, do some research online about the Great Reset, and you make your own decisions. But I would argue that in this day and age, it shouldn't be that hard of a conclusion to reach. All right, so let's go a little further. Societal dimensions: growing inequalities and social unrest risks. Larger, see, that's them. They're kind of predictive programming, because they knew, as per Klaus Schwab saying, it's going to be an angry time. It's going to be an angry society. I'm paraphrasing there, but larger government roles and strengthened safety nets. Now, that sounds a lot like totalitarianism to me. redefining the social contract with an inclusion focus. There's your ESG and your DEI agendas, mental health and behavioral changes post-pandemic. I wonder what they're referring to there. Need for strengthened and resilient social systems. Now, I'm just going to throw this up real quick. My disclaimer, this stream and my videos are for information, education, and entertainment purposes only. So I'm just going to leave that up there for a second. But always do your own research, think critically, and trust your own judgment. We encourage open-minded discussion and respectful dialogue in the comments. So I'm not giving advice. I'm giving my opinion based on information, and I'm giving my theories just to get that out of the way. All right. So this is one of those scenarios. I talk about this kind of stuff a lot, actually. I think we're in a time right now where in the last 6 years, since spring of 2020, there has been a major wealth transfer to the richest people in the world. And not just wealth, but there's been a consolidation of power. And oftentimes in crises, people get convinced either through fear or they want to be the good person, the good part of the group, will give up their own rights for the quote unquote greater good. But oftentimes, just look throughout history, and you'll see that these were the narratives that were presented to people in order for the power structure to take power away from citizens and consolidate more power to a very small group of people. And I'm sure we've all heard this before. Once your rights and your power are taken away, you don't get them back. Just look at history. It's without a revolution of some type, people do not get their rights back. So again, that's just my take on it. All right, so the macro reset, geopolitical dimensions. Accelerated deglobalization and rising nationalism reshape global order. U.S.-China rivalry intensifies, deepening geopolitical fractures. Weakened global governance leaves fragile states increasingly at risk. This is, the greater good. We have to protect the weak. Calls for improved international cooperation to address shared vulnerabilities. Now, this right here is the geopolitical level. So this is at the global level, and on a global level, they frame it, we have to protect the more vulnerable countries and the more vulnerable socioeconomic strata. But again, you have to look at what they are proposing. And we'll get into, criticisms of this agenda as well, more specific criticisms. So let's keep going. All right. So the macro reset on the environmental and technological dimensions, right? This is where you start, if you pay attention, you start to see the grooming for this technocratic state. Environmental degradation and zoonotic disease, pandemic origins linked to ecosystem collapse. Urgent climate action required. That's a big one. The reset as opportunity to decouple growth from carbon emissions. Remember, if they can control energy, they can control, that's just almost the equivalent of controlling the food supply, which they're trying to do that as well. We'll get into that much more detail in a later episode. The fourth industrial revolution accelerated. AI, automation, and digitization reshaping every sector. Isn't that convenient? with stakeholder capitalism, all that power and control will be consolidated largely among the technocratic types, like the big AI corporations, all the big tech organizations. And we know what agendas they have been pushing. We know about the censorship. We know about the surveillance state. We know about the backdoor access that they gave the government during COVID. And I'm sure it's, in my opinion, it's still going on. Benefits versus risks. Technological promise weighed against mass surveillance and dystopian control. That's kind of like a limited hangout because they know that would be one of the major criticisms. A micro reset, industry and business shifts, digitization and remote work acceleration reshape the global workforce. They pushed that really hard during COVID. Supply chain resilience becomes a strategic imperative post-pandemic. Stronger government business ties emerge as interdependence deepens. Now, that's the stakeholder capitalism they're talking about, consolidating more power among big business and governments. So, stakeholder capitalism adopted in practice ESG, inclusion, and long-term value. Long-term value. They always throw the buzzwords in there. Okay. So let's go back for a second. Let's talk about that for a minute. Okay. Remote work, right? They pushed that for a while, and it's still going on in many cases. We did rebound a little bit from that, and people did go back to work. Supply chain, we all experienced this during COVID, that they were saying, oh, there were limitations based on supply chain issues, and a lot of costs of things increased due to supply chain issues, but they didn't go back down after the supposed supply chain issues resolved. Now, I believe that they manufactured the supply chain issues because I think the whole thing was manufactured, but that's just my opinion. All right, let's go. Let's go to the next one. There's only a couple more slides. Individual reset. Personal and behavioral change. What does that remind you of? Kind of reminds me of like PSYOP. Reprioritization of time, creativity, health, and nature over consumption. Mental health awareness surges as a defining post-pandemic shift. Moral and value shifts, rethinking what matters in post-pandemic life. Introspection and lifestyle reassessment. A forced pause becomes a turning point. Now, to play devil's advocate with myself, yes, there are aspects of our society and our economic world that need to be rethought and reassessed. However, I don't see any scenario in which the public will benefit by giving over our powers to a very small group of elites. Right? I tend to think that whenever these powerful organizations and institutions are trying to gain more control, it's not for the betterment of society and it's not for the benefit of citizens. Now, we've seen that. I don't need to break it all down. I encourage people, as always, you have to do the research and you have to connect the dots. You have to trust your instincts and don't be afraid, like I've said, to follow your instincts and speak out about things that you disagree with, even if there's a fear of being judged or shunned. You have to, if more people spoke out in the last 6 years, I guarantee you, and we're very vocal about it, we wouldn't have gone through what we went through. And I don't think we would have emboldened the elite class as much as they have been through what happened during COVID and what followed. All right, so let's keep going here. I mean, just think about what they're saying here. Introspection and lifestyle reassessment. Yes, that's not a bad thing. a forced pause is not necessarily a bad thing, but that it has to come from the individual, not forced on them from the top down. Just my opinion. The world will never return to the way it was before. Wishful thinking for them. We have a choice. Build back better. That sounds familiar. Resilient, green, and inclusive, or revert to a worse version of what existed before. Again, that's, I think, predictive programming and wishful thinking on behalf of the global elites. All right. So the key players, I talked about this. These are the key points. Klaus Schwab, founder and executive chairman of the World Economic Forum since 1971. And he's the primary architect of this stakeholder capitalism and the Great Reset initiative, which was launched in June 2020. However, I would argue that it's been in place for a very long time. These agendas, Thierry Malloret, economist, risk analyst, and co-author, founder of the Monthly Barometer, which I'd mentioned before, specializing in global macro risk forecasting. His systemic risk framework underpins the book's analytical core. And of course, the World Economic Forum, the Davos-based international NGO convening governments, corporations, and civil society annually. Its Great Reset initiative repackaged stakeholder capitalism as the definitive post-pandemic reconstruction agenda. And stakeholder capitalism. We're seeing this. We're seeing this right before our eyes. It's played out a lot in the last 6 years. It's been going on for a long time. I mean, you go back to like Citizens United, it's consolidating power among corporations, which essentially translates to wealthy elites. So stakeholder capitalism and well-being model. Schwab's central doctrine: corporations must serve all stakeholders, not just shareholders. New Zealand's well-being budget is cited as a leading model, redefining national success beyond GDP. Now, I am not against having some social systems and a social safety net at all. I'm not against that stuff, but I think you need to have a balance between capitalism and socialism. See, they try to make them mutually exclusive, like it's got to be one or the other, and that's how they keep people divided. In my opinion, and I am for capitalism. I believe that education, I believe healthcare, and I believe housing should be subsidized. We already pay an insane amount of money. We're taxed out the ass. We're double taxed. We're triple taxed. And so I think that there should be, the way society is structured, and it's gotten progressively worse, is corruption that I believe was able to flourish as a result of what happened, what started in spring of 2020, or at least kicked off during that time, emboldened these power structure elites, these global elites. And so they have forwarded and accelerated their agendas because I believe that they realized that people were going to start waking up to what's really going on. And I'm hopeful that it seems to me that more people have been waking up. So let's think about this here. You know, I've talked about this type of stuff. So here's some of the criticisms. Lack of specificity and optimism, right? It's heavy on abstractions and buzzwords, like I mentioned earlier. Lacking concrete policy detail or actionable frameworks, presents a false binary choice. Embrace the Great Reset or revert to a worse status quo, which is typical with psyops. Naive top-down governance. Assumptions ignore political and institutional realities. Elite bias and techno managerialism. This is essentially what I was saying, a technocratic state. Solutions designed by and for a privileged global class. right? This is the elite class that I was speaking of. So, economic policy and philosophical issues, anti growth and degrowth proposals viewed as economically unrealistic and damaging to prosperity. Market versus central planning debate. Critics argue the reset favors top down technocratic control over free markets, which it absolutely does, in my opinion. Instrumentalizing crisis as opportunity, using COVID-19 to push pre-existing elite agendas is exactly what I've talked about ad nauseum, that these agendas have been in place for a long time. Normalization of surveillance and social control under the guise of public health and safety. Oh, the greater good. So let's think about that for a second. I've talked about, see, the reason why I'm discussing this particular topic in this book is because I always say you have to draw the threads and connect the dots. It's up to us to do that. So I tend to talk about a lot of things, and I don't spell it out always what the connections are and what the relevance is. You have to, we're all smart people. We're all capable of critical thought. So we have to be able to, why? Why am I talking about this? Because these things that we're seeing in society are symptomatic of the direction that the world has been going for a long time, but also a representation of how it has always been. Has always been this top level global elite that have controlled the financial sector, the government, geopolitical sector, and then that trickles down. And I've always said corruption trickles down. And so that's kind of the reason why I'm framing this as a bigger picture thing, because these agendas are still in place. They're not going to advertise it to the world. Hey, how do you guys like the Great Reset so far? They're just they laid the groundwork. Was it predictive programming? Possibly. They lay the groundwork. They basically tell you what they're going to do. They're not asking for our approval. Okay. It's almost done. Broader WEF and tone concerns. Corporate influence versus national sovereignty concerns. The World Health Organization, by the way, is very intimately connected with all of this. WEF's agenda perceived as overriding democratic governance, which I agree 100%. Ambiguity and vague language fueling conspiracy theories and public distrust. I think that's justified. Elitist, snobbish tone dismissing populism and grassroots political movements. Of course, that's the way the elites always are. They're the chosen ones to rule over us. They know, they're the quote unquote experts. Lack of normative depth or pragmatic pathways, long on vision, short on actionable policy detail. So, as I always say, question everything. Seek the truth, because it's up to us to do that. All right. So I'd like to get, people's feedback, because people will say, and I've seen it in comments, okay, well, being aware of it's great, but what do you do about it? This is one of the things that I want to make very clear. I didn't start this channel to just outrage people, because that used to piss me off when I would see content creators that would just try to foment outrage and division, and because that's good for clicks, right? It's good for their channel. It's good for their platform. What I want to do is make people realize it doesn't matter if we agree on everything. In fact, people shouldn't agree on everything, because that would take diversity out of the picture. People have different experiences. They're going to have different beliefs. They're going to have a different take on the world. Their they have different emotional makeups and psychological makeups. We're not supposed to agree on everything. But if people realize that by first and foremost realizing that we as a society, whether we agree on everything or not, they've painted the elites. When I say they, we all know who they is, right? The global elites, the financial elites, the donor class, and so on. You get the picture. They have convinced society that it's us against each other. So what do? They they segregate us into these groups, these labels, to keep us fighting against each other, because they know if people woke up, if enough people woke up and realized that it's really all of us together, against the global elites who do not have our best interest in mind. And I think we can all agree, I hope we can all agree we've seen enough evidence to prove that. So I'm tired of I disagree with a lot of things when it comes to political things and certain narratives and things like that. But I've realized that is all nonsense. It's manufactured division, in my opinion. So think about that. Think about why am I pointing out these things? I want people to really and truly understand that if we have this awakening, then you can also project. I know this might sound a little crazy. I've spoken about it before. By people making deep changes and changes in the way they think and the way they look at the world, like a paradigm shift, it's a powerful thing. And I believe it grows exponentially in the way that I believe there is an overall energy to everything. And I think that if people change the way they think and feel about the world we're living in, we can all collectively project that. And I think we have a much better chance of making real positive changes in the world if we start to do that more. And I say this all the time. I'm not like a woo-woo guy. I'm not like all into meditating and things like that. But I believe that one person's ideas and thoughts that they project onto the world or into the world can make a difference. And if you get a more of a collective awakening happening, then I think the changes can be more profound and be amplified. I really truly believe that. I sincerely believe that with all my heart. With every fabric of my being, I believe that. So, one of the things that I talk about a lot in all my videos, just about, is that we're regular people, right? Regular people, generally speaking, and certainly in my experience, we're not trying to rule the world. Not everybody has that kind of entitlement where they think they're the ones chosen to rule over people. There are people in the world that I believe come from these elite bloodlines that's all they've known their whole lives, that they are the elites and it's their chosen place in the world to control, and to control the masses, to control all the global resources. And I don't think your average person could ever think like that. And so we have been weakened as a global society. And this painting this rosy picture of these globalist policies, that's a standard tactic. It's like advertising. I mean, it's propaganda, it's PR, because whenever they look, people should have the right to determine what's good, what they think is good for them, and not have it forced onto them by these people who pretend to be well-meaning, pretend to care about equity and global health. do I need to? I mean, I'm sure you guys don't need me to get into that. Good people don't want to control the world. Good people want to live their lives, not harm others. We're not pushing agendas on anybody. Freedom and people's right to choose the way they live their life and what they can and can't do and how they spend their money and where they can travel to and what they can read and what information they can have access to. People have the right to make those determinations, not a very small amount of global elite. So you get the picture. One of the other things, and I'll sort of wrap up with this idea. These types of policies, these globalist policies, they're incongruent with psychological and sociological principles, right? They don't work in conjunction. People, by nature, yes, they want to belong to groups, but typically small groups of their choosing, not to be lumped into being a global group of people. That's why there are enclaves in all cities, people from different countries and different cultural backgrounds that they gravitate towards each other naturally. That's a standard sociological phenomenon. People should have the right, self-determinism. And it's just their policies and their ideas are designed to benefit a small group of people, relatively very small. It does not align with what I think would be the wants and needs and desires of citizens, unless you're one of the wealthy elites, in my opinion. So with that, I'm going to say, I hope you guys all had a great weekend. I appreciate everybody's support. Please like and subscribe to the channel. It definitely helps me out, and share the content if you like it. Going forward, I've said this before, I'm probably going to be doing lives as a sort of moving target on the weekends, depending on what I have going on. But I'm going to try to do at least 2 lives each weekend, some of them, and I'll get people's feedback on times. If I can't do it at night, earlier in the day, or like in the morning here. And I'll try to do at least 1 pre-recorded video per week. And then as I move forward, I'll try to ramp that up when I have the time to do so. But I will, for now, I'll try to do at least 1 pre-recorded. I might be doing more Wednesdays on Birdie Bombshell's show. Shout out to the Hive. Shout out to the Devil's Advocates crew. Shout out to the Custody Queens, Off the Clock with Ron. And I appreciate all of their support as well. So I'll be seeing you guys soon. I'll announce when I'm going to do my next live. It'll most likely be Saturday and Sunday. I'm hoping, but I'll let you guys know for sure going forward. So thanks everybody. Have a great night, and I'll see you soon.